Yeah, there's no sponsors anyway, so there'll probably be a light attendance anyway. Okay. Okay, let me share my screen. Here we go. Morning, everybody.
Morning, Rabbi. Gentlemen.
All of you gentlemen who are frightened of Omicron, good morning.
Good morning.
Okay. Yeah.
It really does sound like a name from a science fiction movie, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah. It's people. Remember that line from Soylent Green? Anyway, okay. So yesterday we were just in the middle of our discussion of insurance. Moish just notified me that in Ontario, you're not required by law to have fire insurance for a building. It's just that you need it in order to get for a mortgage company to give you a mortgage. You need fire insurance. But as far as auto insurance, you do need to purchase auto insurance by law. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, Paul, you were in the middle of telling us about what's the word you were using yesterday?
Subrogation.
Yes.
So I thank you for posting that on the chat, Rabbi. I'm not sure I even know how to do that, so thank you. My understanding is that you give over the rights to the insurer to go after the damaging party to recover their costs. And sometimes it'll cover your deductible if they're successful. I don't fully understand it, but I think that's the gist of it. So I think that's why I'm not sure that you can recover doubly, because the damager may have a liability to the insurer. So I don't know how you can then also recover from the damager, even though it sounds like Jewish law says you can.
Well, yeah, Jewish law would say that you can, but only because the damager has to pay. If
right.
The damager is already paying the insurance company, and the insurance company is paying the damagee, so it sounds like everything's in order. And the damagee would not have the right to double dip, right?
Correct.
Okay. Now, to anything else that anyone wanted to talk about yesterday's insurance issue? Okay.
Just one thing I wanted to ask about.
Yes, Barry.
It said that the insured is underinsured. He hasn't insured himself enough. What would be the case there?
Yeah, if he hasn't insured himself enough, right? We saw from the Hilchos Yoav, who was lenient and did not obligate the mazik to pay when the nizik is insured. He said, nonetheless, if he's underinsured or if there's a deductible, the mazik would have to pay that difference. Okay?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Sure. Yeah.
What do? You have three rabbanim who hold three different. How do you come to a resolution?
Right. So Moshe's question is that if you have a machlokas haposkim like this, how do you resolve it in a beis din? And the answer is that as long as the person who's being sued in the beis din has enough knowledge to be able to say, Kimli, I paskin like the opinion that exempts me from paying, then he has every right to say that. The beis din cannot take issue with that. Okay, they simply can't. The guy can say, listen, I paskin. What? Yeah, because usually it's hamotzi mechavero olav haraya. Whoever wishes to extract money has the burden of proof to extract. So if you want to take money from me, you have to know that definitively the psak is that you have a right to take money from me. It's a machlokas haposkim. So yeah, in all cases where it's a machlokas haposkim and it hasn't been resolved, it hasn't like the poskim haven't come out and say, yeah, we go like one side over the other, yeah, the person can definitely say that in such a situation. But that's why it's helpful to know some of these halachos, because a guy could take you to Beis Din, and remember today, Batei Din are more likely to do what's called pishara. They're more likely to create a compromise and try to resolve the dispute so that each party comes out with something. But there are situations where one of the parties or both of the parties will say, I'm willing to go to Beis Din, but I only wish to go based on din, because I know that this particular Beis Din will hold me liable for a certain percentage, and I think I'm totally patur, and I don't want to have to pay at all. Or vice versa. Let's say a Beis Din will try to make a compromise, right? And I know I'm entitled to collect the full sum. Like we as the shul, when we entered into a din Torah, we told the Beis Din, we have a rock solid contract with a person that we made a contract with. Person has defaulted on their obligation, their financial obligation. And so I advised the board when they went to Beis Din, I said, don't say that you want pishara, say that you want din, because it was clear in our situation that we were entitled to a full amount. And so, yeah, okay. All right.
So actually you need a Talmud Chacham rather than a lawyer when you go to Beis Din.
Well, that's true. Before, if a person is going to go to Beis Din, they would be well advised to consult with someone who knows Choshen Mishpat halacha to some degree or another before they go to a din Torah. Yeah, and there is something called a toain. A toain is a person who rents out his services to advise a person who's going to Beis Din. Some of them are on the up and up, and other of them are on the down and down, I guess is what you would say. Yeah. Okay. All right, let's go to the next shaila that we saw in the Likutim, triage with a ventilator. I know I have an obligation to save someone's life, but would I be allowed to remove a ventilator from one patient who's terminal in order to help another patient who has COVID and is in their 50s or 60s, and they have a very good chance of recovery? Okay, so this tshuva is being written in 1985. This was already a serious issue. And this was a huge issue during COVID, was the issue of triage of limited resources, or limited medical resources, and how to distribute limited medical resources. It was driving the medical community crazy. And it's still, it's still being discussed a lot in the news. And so let's take a look. He says, life and death decisions. And it wasn't just Italy. I think there were hospitals throughout US and Canada who were dealing with this. But you're right, in Italy, they did have to make these serious decisions. Okay, Yikartoki balti va'asher hitzia lefnei ani kamoni she'ila chamura bepikuach nefashos mamash. He says, I received your lovely letter, and you placed before me, a poor man like myself, such a serious question that involves life-saving. Shehuva midrom Africa, ayidei rofe mumche she'oved betipul nimratz bebeit cholim sham. And you brought me this shaila from a South African physician who deals with, emergency care in a hospital there. B'toraf ha'she'ela birshutam b'chonat hachaya, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, chadasha ma'od. They have a new ventilator. Okay, it's a new technology, I guess, in the 80s. Ve'ein lahem ela echat, and all they have is one. Ve'efshar lahatzil al yada cholim shechayehem chaye sha'a ve'hem treifa k'mo cholei sartan rachmana litzlan. They have the opportunity to save to preserve sick people who are terminal, such as people who would be who have cancer, God forbid. U'mi'idach midei yom magim cholim shefshel lahatzilim l'chaye olam. But on the other hand, from day to day, they may get a patient who comes in who could use who would benefit from the ventilator because they could survive serious trauma. ואם ישתמש במכונה הנ"ל להציל התרפה לחיישה, אינו יכול לנתק את המכונה ממנו ולתת אותה לחולה שחייב חיי עולם, מפני שממית את הראשון. So if you hook up the ventilator to the cancer patient, who you know is terminal, but just needs some help breathing for a little bit longer so that they don't suffocate and die, by removing the ventilator from the cancer patient, you're going to be killing them. ועל ידי זה החליט בית החולים לא להשתמש במכונה החייאה, כי אם לחולים שניתן לרפאותם ולהצילם לחיי עולם. So based on this dilemma, the hospital in South Africa, which presented the shaila, decided that they're only going to use the ventilator for sick people who could be actually saved permanently through the use of a ventilator temporarily. And that is what they've been doing. And they've saved a lot of, he says, a lot of Jews. And I must be in Johannesburg or something. But the Jewish doctor has a lot of doubts. He's very bothered by this, and he wants das Torah. Like, is this the right thing to deny a cancer patient the use of the ventilator? He says, look, it's hard for me to go into all of the pratim, line by line, but I understand the dilemma. And so I'm going to go through these things one by one. So the first thing he says is, Yesh la'ayin im eno matzil treifa shechayav chaye sha'am im over belavd lo samad al dam re'echa. First thing we should think about is, if I don't save the life, I have the ability to save the life or preserve the life of someone who's terminal. If I neglect to do so, like I just withdraw all medical care from a person who's terminal, am I in violation of the prohibition of lo samad al dam re'echa? Do not stand idly by your brother's blood. Do ulai yesh lomar kevin de sof sof gaver ketila. Maybe you could argue that since this person is really a dead man anyway, in other words, they are terminal. They're going to die from the current disease from which they suffer. Ein lo dam. So then you can't say that I'm standing over the blood of my brother. Maybe he is not considered to have blood from a halachic standpoint. Odilma ma'alaso ve'heyer al zeh mimashakasav harambam perakei merotzeh halacha yud v'hainu mimashakasav harambam le'inyan rotza b'shogeg. I think the word is rotzeach b'shogeg. I think that's a typo. The im harago kol adam ein chayavin alav shenemar ein lo dam. Okay, so there's a halacha that the Rambam says that if a man has committed murder and he's on his way to a near miklat and someone goes ahead and kills that person, so the halacha is, the Torah says, ein lo dam. There is no guilt upon the person who kills him. He says that's not a good proof, because at the end of the day, that person is a murderer, and a murderer has been marked for death. The afal gav deshogeku mikol makom kach gazra Torah de biyotze me'ir miklato chalalav heter de gol hadam lahargo mamish memela ein lo dam b'chol adam. He says, and therefore, since the Torah grants license to the blood avenger to go ahead and kill that person, he's considered to be a dead man. And that may not be the same thing as a person with a terminal illness. Umasha kosav kvodo lahosif lahabi mizem edivrei hameiri sanhedrin v'cheinhu berasha sham midas atzmo the betreifa ein din v'hitzilu ha'eda hoel utreifahu ein choshishin kol kach lahatzalaso. Adkan. So he says that he quotes the Meiri as saying that there's no halacha of vihitzilu ha'eda, that the congregation has an obligation to save someone if that person is a treifa, which means they're terminal. And you'd like to compare it to this situation. Sanhedrin sof hatreifa hazeh ratzach b'fnei beistin v'rotzeyachu. He says in that situation, no, the case in the Gemara over there was where a person committed a murder, and now he has a terminal illness. So there's no reason for the congregation to save him. The Hamayri shehisru osa v'chol prate ischayev benafsho, because that person has also been marked for death. Ela de ba'alma based in shiro be'echad shiratzach ein yocholim ladun mipeis techaser hayesod shel v'hitzilu ha'eda. Zed amrin de kan lo shayach kol kach kaven de sof treifahu the gaver ketila. He says again. He says normally a beis din would not be allowed to just take a person who they believe committed murder and has not been incriminated yet, and just to leave him to his own devices. Aval pasha da'anu ein mechayvim oso misa el mipnei shemagia lo kein bedine ritzicha ve'ein damo mufkar stam ma she'en ken yidon didon shenogel litchot chaye treifa biyadayim o bishlila. But over here, this person has not been marked for death. He is suffering from a terminal condition, but he has not been marked by beis din for death, and therefore it's not easy. It's not clear whether we can just defer saving his life, either proactively or through passivity. Okay. Uma deheir mima shekosef haminchas chinuch shaharodef esatreifa aser laharog esarodef. He says, what about the following? A guy who is pursuing normally a person, what's a rodef? A rodef is a person who is trying to kill somebody else. And so we know the halacha that you're allowed to kill a rodef to prevent him from killing somebody else. But the Minchas Chinuch writes, what if the rodef is pursuing a person with a terminal illness? In other words, he's about to kill a patient who is suffering from cancer, right? Are you allowed to kill the person who's trying to kill a terminal patient, who's performing euthanasia on a terminal patient? Can you kill that person based on the halacha that they're a rodef? So the Minchas Chinuch says you're not allowed to. Ve'heir gam midivrei hagon achi ezer chelek yoredeis min tav zayin bazeh gam mizeh ein shum dimin dechol din rodef chidushu. He says you can't infer from there that you don't have to treat a person with a terminal illness. He says because that's a chiddush, a novelty, that you can kill a rodef. The chazeh lo chidsha Torah gam berodef laharog shelo biyadayim mipnei hatzola satreifa. And so the whole point is that it's only that you don't have a right to kill a rodef. Okay? Uma deher mimasha kasav minchas chinuch mitzvah lamed beis v'ayin mitzvah reish sadivav v'taf reish v'nistapik lo imuter lechalol Shabbos avor treifa. What about that? Are you allowed to be machalol Shabbos for a terminal patient? And it's the Minchas Chinuch has this suffix. He's not clear whether you can or not. In a kvar halacha yotzeis liYisrael demuter lechalol Shabbos kamal treifa, but that's not how we paskin. We paskin that you are machalol Shabbos even for a terminal patient. Kemavur b'mishnasenu perik ches diyoma ula halacha barachaim simin shin chavtes sifdalid da'afilu mirot seitz va'afilu go seitz machalol l'chayisha kemavur b'poskim sham davar pashut degam treifa bichlal. That even if a person is on their deathbed, and you can prolong their life even by a few seconds by being Machalol Shabbos, let's say just, operating their electrical bed to make them more comfortable so that they'll live for a few minutes, that for sure you're allowed to do. And it's not even a shaila in the Shulchan Aruch. And therefore, you cannot infer just because a terminal patient's halachic status is reduced in some way from a healthy person, that you don't have to you don't have to provide life-saving measures for a terminal patient. Okay, so that's the first thing that we have to bear in mind, that even a patient who is terminal, I have an obligation to do whatever I can to save their life, right? But there are times now, of course, he's not getting into the famous tshuva from Rav Moshe Feinstein. What about heroic measures? But his question is, what about the attending to that person with the ventilator when currently no one else needs it? That's the dilemma that he's dealing with over here, out of a concern that a patient will come in who is not terminal and needs the ventilator to save their life. Well, that's the problem. That's the problem that they're dealing with, because once he's connected, if you disconnect him from the ventilator, they're going to die within minutes, right? So that's the concern, is that you're actively euthanizing the patient by disconnecting them, but you're doing it for the sake of saving someone else's life who's non-terminal. Okay.
And I guess if you don't put them on in the first place, you don't run into that conundrum.
That's right. And that's the reason why they have this dilemma. Okay. So that's the first consideration, is that we have to be very clear that there is a mitzvah to administer life-saving measures even to terminal patients. Number two, are you allowed to kill a terminal person in order to save the life of a healthy person? Okay. Could you harvest the organs of a terminal patient in order to take those organs and put them into a healthy person? The Noda Behuda says that you're not allowed to kill a terminal patient in order to save a healthy patient or otherwise healthy patient. The Hagam de Matzasi b'Meiri Sanhedrin Ayin Beis Amud Beis Mevor de Mutulim Sor Trafik de Lahatzil Chaburas B'nei Adam Shleimin. He says the Meiri does note that, let's say a city is under siege and the oppressor says, give us one of you or we'll kill all of you. So normally you're not supposed to surrender anyone unless they volunteer. But if one of them is a terminal patient, he says, like in the movie, he says, I got cancer anyway, might as well use me, right? So I got 3 months to live. There must be at least a dozen movies that have that kind of line, right? So shoot me out of the into space, whatever it is, So the Meiri seems to say that in order to save a whole population of people, you could submit the terminal terminal patient. Okay, he says Sarach Iyanim halacha came, but it's not clear that that's how we paskin. Furthermore, when they say, give us one of you, it's not clear that they're going to immediately kill that person in that case that the Meiri was dealing with. Okay, let me refer you to a certain footnote there. Okay, that's number two. Number two is, it's what's unclear is, do we allow you to actively kill a terminal patient to save the life of an otherwise healthy patient? Gimel, shuv kasav kvodo imachola sheyiye ba'asid nechshav rak safek hatzalas chayi olam im yesh lahadiv safek hatzalas olam v'lidchos b'shevei al taisa vade chaye sha'a shel treifa. He says, one of the ways that you presented the shaila is that you might be able to save the life of the patient that comes in now, maybe, and that might take priority over a person who you know for sure is terminal, right? Who is the current patient and in other words, all you have is a suffix, because right now no patient has come in, but you know that there's a possibility that a patient will come in whose life you might be able to save with the ventilator. So could you argue that it's permissible to passively deny this ventilator to the terminal patient? And that was the argument that you wanted to argue. you bring a Gemara from Avodah Zarah, v'hainu mimad dekomer hashas, the vadai meis misrapin migoy, the ha'ika chayisha. And I think the case over there is that if a person knows he's for sure going to die, he's allowed to accept medical care from a Gentile. And I think the case over there is that the Gemara says you should not accept medical care from a Gentile lest he come to kill you. That's the concern. Maybe it's a heathen and you're worried that if you submit to his medical care, he's going to kill you. The Gemara says, but if you're terminal anyway, then you're allowed to accept medical care. And then the Gemara asks, but what about the fact that he may terminate you prematurely before your disease takes you? And the Gemara answers, L'chayisha lo chayshina. The Gemara says, for that we're not concerned about. That's a concern of a few more days or weeks of life. We permit that risk, and that's what's brought in the Shulchan Aruch. V'gilyon maharsham etshuvas shvus Yaakov v'beis Meir yoredeis imshin lamates bedin da'asur lasus davar lekaret misos kasab. And related to this, these poskim write that even though it's not permitted to hasten one's death, kasab initially mutar az lasos l'refua al yedei mumcha shemesupak shayidei refua talalo. He says, based on this, are you allowed to accept experimental treatment, right, that may end up killing you or may end up curing you, right? But if you don't take the treatment, you'll surely die. And if you accept the treatment might kill you, before the disease will, or it might cure you. Ach Omar im lo yaser refuah vada yamus ela sheishlacho shim lo taleh harafui al yedei hapula kiruv misa. Right, that's exactly the way I described it. It's an experimental treatment. There's a high risk involved that the treatment itself will kill the patient. Are you allowed to accept that kind of treatment? Because of a base mayor, the shori may high time of mavur reshim and kufman heyanal, the lachai shalo chayshin and kahai gavne v'chayotzebo b'tshuvas achi ezer, etc. And he says the base mayor says you are allowed to accept that treatment, because it's only a matter of chayesha, of a small amount of life that you may be risking. You're allowed to risk a short time span of life in order to gamble and hope that the treatment will end up curing you and give you a much longer lifespan. It also might kill you, but he says that's a justifiable risk. And he says, Uva emes ein mizeh shum raya lenidon dedan, but you can't apply that to over here. Basically, what you want to argue is that you see from that case that a small amount of time of life is not considered important. So therefore, maybe that would justify not administering the ventilator to a person who only has chayesha left to live. He only has a small time amount left on this earth. So you see that the Gemara says we can dispense with that small amount of time when there's a justifiable risk. Maybe you could say the same thing over here. There's a possibility that a patient will come in who needs the ventilator, so we can justify not administering the ventilator to the terminal patient out of the hope that we might be able to save the living patient, the patient that walks in.
What is happening? That is that you're allowed to take experimental treatment.
Yeah. Right. But that would even make it even more justifiable. But the point is that when you think about it, the cases are not really analogous. You're risking, in the case of the Gemara, there's only one patient involved. You're risking his chayesha for the potential for him to live longer. In our case, you're certainly dispensing with the terminal patient's chayesha out of a possibility that you might be able to save another person's life. And so that's...
It's not the patient.
It's a maybe. That's right. And so that's why they're not really so analogous. He says, he says, really, you can't bring a proof from there. And he's going to explain. He says, the Hasam b'shas avodah zarah v'chayotze bo mashakasav v'beis meir v'shvus Yaakov Anudan al safik chayesha shel adam v'chayesha shel adam ze atzmo. He uses the same argument that I just presented to you. He basically says that it's the same person. You're dealing with one person who is terminal, and you want to risk the remaining, let's say, weeks or months that he has left to live with the cancer in order to try an experimental treatment that may end up killing him. He says, "Im kain rishus nesuna lanu lishko litovaso dechias chayisha delay avor safek chayi olam delay," and therefore we are justified in risking his short amount of time left as a terminal patient for the sake of perhaps giving him a much longer life when he tries this treatment. But to defer the terminal patient who's right in front of us and say, we're not going to treat you in order to be able to save someone else's life who isn't even here, and we don't even know if he's going to show up, that you can't, that from here, that you cannot infer. Mihu, however, im omed lifnei adam shlishi hanidon, im lahatzil chayisha, lahatzil chayi olam, v'adayin lo hitchilu l'tapel b'chayisha. He says, now clearly, if we have two patients in front of us, and we have one terminal patient, we have one patient who is not terminal, but needs a ventilator, right? Like he's got COVID, right?
How about the time?
Oh, what time is it? Oh my gosh.
It's a cliffhanger.
Okay. Sorry, I'm sorry. I wasn't even aware of the time.
We were getting roasted all the
Okay.
time.
All right. Have a good day, everybody.